Saul looks pretty incredible. He's very impressive so far in this storyline. All right, now, somebody? Okay, so in a little while, though, things begin to change. Skip over to chapter 13. This is sort of an interesting note. Before we go to chapter 13, go back to chapter... Let me get my pages to open up for me here. What's going on here? Chapter 10. Look at chapter 10 at verse 8. So, Saul's just not sure that he's the right guy for the job. And Samuel tells him, he says, several things are going to happen. So Samuel says, watch for these signs. This will be confirmation to you that you are God's chosen king for Israel. He told him about some incidents that were going to happen, and they did. Some things that he would encounter. And then as he's telling him these things, look in chapter 10, verse 8, thou shalt go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come down unto thee to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry till I come to thee and show thee what thou shalt do. Now, I've got a mark in my margin. Maybe you want to note in your margin. From that verse, go to chapter 13, verse 8. In chapter 13, verse 8, everything that Samuel said was going to happen, happened. And Saul ends up at Gilgal in chapter 13 at verse 8. Now, the first verses of this chapter, the Philistine army is arrayed against him, and they are powerful. They've got an enormous force of soldiers. Saul's looking pretty weak here. He doesn't look like he's going to have nearly enough people to fight this battle. So in chapter 13, verse 8, Saul tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of the offering, the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash, therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said unto Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. And so, this is the first hint that there's something wrong with Saul here. I think you could almost sympathize, put yourself in his shoes. He was worried. And the few soldiers he had were scattering. He's arrayed against an enormous Philistine army. But he's not authorized to make sacrifices. He said, but I forced myself to do so because you didn't show up like I thought you should. Samuel actually got there on the day he was supposed to be there. Saul was just jumping the gun, we would say probably. And he offered sacrifices, which was unauthorized for him to do so. And so here's the first statement. Your family dynasty is not going to continue. If you'd done what the Lord told you to do, if you kept his commandments, you and your sons and this reign would have continued, but it's not going to. Now, God's going to give the kingship to some other man, a man after his own heart. We know he's talking about David there. So that's the first flaw. But the better known flaw in King Saul happens in chapter 15. 1 Samuel 15. This is when Samuel tells Saul, verse 2, this is chapter 15, verse 2, the Lord of hosts thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember what Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up out of Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. So, this goes back in Israelites' history. When they were coming out of Egypt, as they were traveling toward the promised land, the Amalekites came from behind them and attacked the rear guard of this mass of people who were migrating. And they killed off the weak and the sick and the children. And it enraged God what the Amalekites did. And there was a promise made back then. And you might note Exodus 17, verse 14. There was a promise then that God was going to bring retribution upon the Amalekites for what they'd done. He hadn't done that until now. This is hundreds of years later. But Samuel commissions Saul, go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Utterly destroy means don't take any spoil. We know that very commonly when nations went to war in those times, one of the reasons they did it was to take the spoil of the people that they conquered. In this case, take no spoil. But as you look at verse 9, they went, they fought, they won the battle. Verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag the king and the best of the sheep and the oxen and of the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. So they kept the best of the stuff. You know this story. This is sadly one of the better known or better remembered parts of Saul's failure. Now we said he started out so great. Now he's on a terrible decline. He's not doing right stuff at all. You remember, skip down to verse 20. Samuel goes out to meet him as he's returning, and he's bringing all this spoil with him. Verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, Saul says to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and I have brought Agag the king of Amalek and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people, now I didn't do this. This was not on me. The people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. I wonder how many sermons you've ever heard on this text. I mean, it's right there, isn't it? You got to do what you're told to do. Don't be giving me an end justifies the means kind of an argument. So if this is true, and I think at this point this probably wasn't even true. We're bringing these animals back because we're going to have this enormous sacrifice ceremony. We're going to sacrifice all these animals to the Lord. It's going to be wonderful. I'll tell you, you never saw such an elaborate worship, sacrifices and praise to God as we're fixing to do. I don't think that was true. I think he's just making an excuse here, but take it at face value. Say they were going to offer all those sacrifices, all those animals as sacrifices. Samuel says to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. He's not buying it. Samuel's not buying it, right? So this was just another incident in Saul's decline. It's a well-known incident. Chapter 1 Samuel 15. He's supposed to utterly destroy the Amalekites, and he did not. Okay. First king, when we quizzed the little kids in Sunday night Bible drill class, who are the first three kings of Israel? Saul, David, Solomon, right? They're the only three kings who were kings over all of Israel. And so we call this period, now remember we're trying to get this historic overview, we call this the period of the United Kingdom. All the tribes are united and they have one king. First King Saul, then David, then Solomon. After that, we're going to see that the nation divides. So this is the United Kingdom. Saul's the first king, but of course he's failing now. He started out so wonderfully, but he's failing badly. Skip to 1 Samuel 16. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 1, the Lord said to Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil, and go, I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. All right, so Samuel is to go. And the new king is going to be one of the sons of this man, Jesse, in Bethlehem. Skip down to verse 6. It came to pass when they were come that he looked on Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, Look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. There's another famous passage, isn't it? So he sees the firstborn of Jesse, big, tall, strong guy. Surely, Samuel said, surely that's the guy. That must be the guy. And the Lord said, that's not the one. The Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. So he ends up calling all the sons of Jesse forward in I think, the chronological age progression. You skip down to verse 10. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. Samuel said to Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. So David, the youngest son of Jesse, is chosen. He will be the next king over Israel. Boy, there's a whole lot of history as the book of 1 Samuel progresses. Wait.
I'm sorry. I might have to backtrack. I keep thinking about what you said about Saul, about his attitude toward God. But, Samuel told him, God has taken the kingdom away and given it to your neighbor. Your line is not going to last. But even though he knew David was going to be the next king, he kept pursuing the whole book of 1 Samuel to the end of his life, basically. Yeah. He kept pursuing him, trying to kill him, even though David had it at least a couple of times when David could have killed him.
Killed Saul, yeah.
Killed Saul, and he spared his life just because David wouldn't do it, and Saul still kept after him.
Yeah. As Wade said, the rest of the book of 1 Samuel pretty much is this transition from Saul to David. And Saul knows that David has been chosen, and so he pursues him aggressively and tries to kill him, and of course is not successful in doing so. Saul is ultimately killed in the last chapter. Of course, David comes to full prominence in the David and Goliath episode, right? Probably one of the best known stories of the Bible is David killing the giant Goliath. And that just skyrockets him to prominence and popularity among the people. And the women of Israel even saying, Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his 10,000. Oh man, that really got to Saul's jealous heart. And it was that sort of thing. The increasing popularity of David, Saul was going to try to kill him if he could. He was obviously not successful. And at the last chapter of 1 Samuel, Saul and his son Jonathan die in battle with the Philistines. And so he's gone. J.D.?
Yeah, an interesting discussion around this that I've had with some others before is thinking about the wrong things that Saul did and then thinking about the wrong things that David did. Yet the consequence with Saul, even from almost the beginning, was he had lost his kingdom. Whereas with David, of course, I think the answer here is more that God sees the inward, and something big had changed about Saul from the beginning. Unlike with David, when he sinned, somewhere deep in there, he was still the same person after God's own heart. And he was willing to quickly admit, I've fallen into this thing, this is wrong, I've got to change. And I think something had vastly changed about Saul even from that very first episode.
Yeah.
Saul
I think That's got to be what it is, JD. It's got to be the difference of heart between these two. Because David was no perfect person either. But when confronted with his sin, instead of locking in, he repented. So the author asks us, he says David far from flawless. And then he points out, which is sadly, of all the great things David did and accomplished, if you were to take a survey, of course, most people, if you ask people to what do you remember about King David? I think the first thing probably would be David and Goliath. But sadly, the second thing could be David and Bathsheba, right? Wade?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you was talking about the song that the women sing. That song was so popular. Later on in the 29th chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, David actually had went over to the Philistines and taken about 400 soldiers with him. And they were actually going to go into battle against Israel with the Philistines. And the commander said, "Is this not David," in verse 5, "is this not David of whom they sing in the dances, saying Saul is slain his thousands and David his 10,000?
Even the Philistines knew that song. Yeah, exactly right. So, the author of our questions asked us to sort of talk about the progression of the sin with Bathsheba. And again, almost everything we're talking about in these lessons is something that has been used for sermons, the basis of sermons for centuries. I know I've preached on a lot of these texts. I'm sure Josh has. I'm sure Wayne has. I mean, they just lend themselves to preaching. These texts just lend themselves to being preached. So, David and Bathsheba. What are the takeaways from the story of David and Bathsheba? Well, one of the things is that one sin leads to another. And once you get started down that road, one thing easily follows another. So he committed adultery with Bathsheba. She turns up pregnant. He calls her husband back from the battlefront and tries to get him to have relations with his wife. And he won't do it because he says, my countrymen are in the field with the war. I'm not going to enjoy myself at home. He gets him drunk, and he still won't go to his wife. So he sends, Bathsheba's husband was Uriah the Hittite. He sends Uriah back to the battlefront with his own death warrant in hand. He says, deliver this message to Joab. Joab was the captain of the army. And he says, press the battle hard. And in the very heat of the battle, withdraw from Uriah. Back off from him, let him be taken. And they did. Joab, Joab, the captain of David's army, he was a despicable fellow himself. He's glad enough to do a dirty job like that. And so they do exactly as David instructed. They withdraw from Uriah in the heat of the battle. Uriah is killed. David takes his wife. So he committed adultery. He lied. He made every attempt to cover up his sin. He ultimately committed murder effectively, and then takes Bathsheba to be his wife. As J.D. was mentioning again, this is not a pretty story. This is not a pretty story. So how's come, this point J.D. is making, I think it's a worthy point. How's come he took the kingdom away from Saul, but he left David in there? And he let David have a dynasty, a progression. I think it's the heart of the man. When David was, remember in chapter 12, 2 Samuel chapter 12, when Nathan the prophet goes to David and confronts him about his sin, David doesn't hesitate at all. He said, I have sinned. He didn't offer excuse. He didn't argue. He accepted there were going to be consequences. Nathan says there'll be consequences for what you've done, but you will survive this. Yeah, Josh.
I was going to say, not without consequences. David had his 4 lambs, he had restored 4-fold.
Yeah.
And he had family trouble. He had consequences.
Yeah. Even though he was forgiven and allowed to continue as king, he paid the price for what he'd done. Sin always bears consequence. That's another great takeaway from the story of David and Bathsheba, to be sure. Okay, quickly, we're just going to run out of time. 3, so as you're picturing this Bible timeline now, We've passed the time of the judges. Now we're in the period of the kings. This is the period of the united kingdom. Only 3 kings over all Israel: Saul, David, Solomon. David's son Solomon becomes the 3rd king over Israel. 1 Kings chapter 2. Turn to 1 Kings chapter 2. Yes.
Thomas brings up a good point. In Second Samuel, was the 2nd chapter, talks about Saul's son.
Jonathan.
No, the one that was the nursemaid dropped.
Oh, yeah. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth.
Was, well, I think it starts with I. He was made king, but all of Israel followed him for 2 years, except for Judah, the house of Judah. Ishbosheth, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an extra little storyline there. It's actually, in the broader history of Israel, it's not a big deal, but his one surviving son did try to take the throne. And Abner, the captain of the army, tried to back him up, but didn't get the job done. Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2. Here's what David tells. David's about to die. Verse 1, 1 Kings 2, verse 1. Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself, that the Lord may continue his word which he spake concerning me, saying, if thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. So, as David's about to die, he charges Solomon to be faithful and obedient to the Lord's commands. There's a little history here. We just don't have time to dive into it. One of the other sons of David, Adonijah by name, he tried, as David was about to die, he was near death. Adonijah, one of his sons, tried to usurp the throne, but he failed, and Solomon was reassured to the throne. The author didn't ask any questions, but I don't see how you talk about Solomon without talking about the famous request of Solomon. Look in chapter 3, 1 Samuel 3, verse 5. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon. This is 1 Kings 3, verse 5. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept from him this great kindness, and thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king, me, instead of David my father. And I am but a little child, I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great people? And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. So, Solomon's very humble request. He could have anything. The old idea of rubbing the lamp and the genie pops out and I give you 3 wishes. That's just foolishness. But in the case of Solomon, it actually happened that he was given his wish. God said, ask whatever you want and I'll give it to you. And Solomon had the humility to ask for wisdom to guide the people. And that thing so pleased God, he said, I'm going to give you that. And then I'm going to give you what you didn't ask for too, and riches and glory and honor. You know, it's just impossible. I'm satisfied it's impossible to compare financials of rich people in the world today with King Solomon. I don't think there's any way to correlate the riches. I've got an opinion that Solomon became very likely the richest man that ever lived in the history of the world. I've read some things where people disagree with that and say that some of the very rich people today, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, richer than Solomon was. I don't know how you make that comparison. I just think that's probably not even possible to do that. I'm of the opinion Solomon probably was the richest person who ever lived in the history of the world. Of course, he had great wisdom. You remember in chapter 3, we don't have time to read that. Remember chapter 3, one of his first sort of claims to fame, one of the things that really made him sort of secured his position among the people. They admired him and were so impressed. 2 women, 2 harlots came before Solomon. They lived together. They both had babies at about the same time. The one had laid on her baby during the night and smothered it to death. So she took her dead baby and put it with the other woman, took the live baby and brought it to herself. Oh, now, so what are we going to do? Because both mothers are saying the live baby is my baby. The dead baby is your baby. Well, how do you solve that? I mean, how are you going to solve that question? Well, you can't do a DNA test, obviously. Solomon said, bring me a sword. Cut this baby in half. Give one half to her and one half to her. Well, why is that going to solve anything, right? And the one mother was, okay. But the real mother said, no, don't kill my baby. Give it to her. She'd rather give the baby to the other woman than to have it killed. Solomon said, there's your mother. Man, of course, that's a famous story in Solomon. But would you, if you hadn't read that story before, if you didn't know that's the way Solomon approached that question, would you have come up with that solution? That's pretty incredible, isn't it? Obvious display of his wisdom. Wade?
I just want to say what you're talking about, him being the richest man in the world, or ever. It wasn't just Solomon that was rich. He made the whole nation rich.
Yeah.
Because at one point it talks about that silver.
With like roadside gravel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole nation.
Yeah. Incredible well. Incredible well. Of course, Solomon is famous for building the temple. And the glory of that temple that Solomon built probably can't even be described. Kind of interesting note, 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 7. The temple, the house, when it was building, was built of stone made ready before it was brought thither, so that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in building. Isn't that incredible? They were doing such a job of craftsmanship. They were able to cut the stones and timbers off-site and bring them there, and it just fit together like a perfect puzzle. Pretty amazing. Real quickly, you have to remember that Solomon, wise as he was, failed at the end. Real quickly, go to chapter 11. Chapter 11. Verse 1, King Solomon loved many strange women together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said to the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon claved unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Again, how many lessons have been taught about that and the importance of choosing the right mate, because the wrong one, in Solomon's case, the wrong 1,000, took him away from the Lord. One of the things that's just shocking to me is that among those that he worshiped and made places of worship in Israel, at the end of verse 7, Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Molech was the idol in which they burned their living babies as sacrifices to Molech. And Solomon was in on that. Solomon built a place of worship even for Molech. That's how far he fell from the Lord at the end of his life. What a sad legacy for Solomon at the end of his life. All right, United Kingdom. So our lesson tonight, United Kingdom. Who are the first three kings of Israel? Quiz the kids. Saul, David, Solomon. Saul, David, Solomon. Only three kings over all of Israel. Thanks, everybody.